Today we're going to we're going to look at foundations, because I forgot to show you guys foundations last time. And then we're going to set up some camera views and look at basically all the options you have with cameras and setting up the sun and all that jazz today, and showing you guys how to log into Autodesk 360 and utilize the cloud for rendering, because it's awesome. And then we're going to hopefully get to displaced elements, which basically allows you to take a 3D view and break up your components and make a exploded 3D axonimetric drawing without having to like export individual parts and reassemble them back into Photoshop somehow. Super pain in the butt. Revit now allows you to do it right in a viewport, which is super awesome and super easy. At any rate, let's get to it. So I'm going to flip to my 3D view in order to start looking at the structural stuff. So this model already has them in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete them and redraw them if I can. So basically in our section that we worked on the other day, we didn't have a stem wall and a footing here. So in a sense it's a little bit unrealistic, right? Because this wall is going to need a foundation. It's not going to be able to sit probably on this slab on grade. So in order to put in a foundation wall, I like to do it in the 3D viewport so that I can kind of see what's going on a little bit better. But we're going to go to our Structures tab, and we're going to go to our Wall Types in our Structure tab and click Structural Wall. And let me see what size this is. Yeah. So this wall is about 2 feet thick. You know, the one that we built up basically. So you're going to want to just take a generic masonry and duplicate it and change the thickness of it to being 24 inches so that it fits nicely with the other wall. And then we can use our pick line tool here. And let's see how screwed up this gets. Last time I had trouble placing these, but so it kind of defaults to like the lower courtyard as our base constraint, and a negative 20-foot offset from that. And then our top constraint is the lower courtyard, which is not really where we want our walls to sit. But I might get some error messages here if I try to change this. Let's give it a shot. Yeah, so it's giving me like a top constraint is invalid for the level. And I don't know why it wants to default to this, but you can always change your wall heights after you place them. So it's not the end of the world that that's the way that this is looking at the moment. So we can go ahead and select our walls here, hopefully all of them. And if you don't have that problem, that's awesome. And I'm going to guess the reason why it's showing that it looks like it's correct because my section box is on. So it's not actually correct. So be careful about that. So now that I have them placed, I can tab through and hopefully make the changes that I need to make here. And so basically we're doing a 4-foot stem wall, right? That's attached to our exterior supporting walls. So if we go back to our section, you can see that that stem wall's there. It's not really in the place that we want it to be, which is kind of odd as well. So you can use the align tool. Hopefully, to get that side and align it. That makes some sense. And you probably just want to go through and do that maybe manually for all of the walls. You can do that in 3D view by selecting the wall first and then align the foundation to it, and it should shift over. Everybody see what I'm doing there? I might actually be wanting to do this on the other side. Let's cancel that, whatever I did there. Let's try that again. Let's see how much that screwed up that wall. That's pretty good. Right? So we've got our stem wall placed, and now in our structures tab we have our foundation systems here. An isolated foundation, so if you have a column that you want to set a foundation pad on, and so in section you start to see that foundation pad, you can do that, and also walls as well. So I'm going to use the wall tool here, and we're going to use the 36 by 12 inch, and you don't have any drawing tools because it just wants you to pick basically your structural walls, and so it just automatically places that in there for you. So going back to the section, you can see we have a foundation for this wall in section. And if these aren't blacked out, again, you can go to our visibility graphics, and under structural foundations we can change the cut pattern to black. Yeah, foundations, framing, to get those to read like the rest of the drawing. So that's how you place structural foundations. Pretty simple. If you also want to do that to these stem walls, there's other ways you can also do it. If you don't want to draw them all out, you could always use your annotation tab with filled regions and kind of fake it. Right? Could fake in one here, and it's the solid black region. So that's the difference between 2D and 3D, right? And we could copy that over to the other side. We'll probably do one for this wall as well. It's not necessarily needed though. Actually, that would probably look a lot different. It would probably look something along the lines of an extension this way for a footing for that wall because of the dirt being pushed that way. So it's pushing the wall this direction, so you put a footer in to resist that push. That makes some sense. You don't necessarily have to put in these footings, but definitely do this one, you know, for the when you turn it in. Okay, so let's set up some camera views, and I guess I'll go over the lights that I have placed in here, so that I don't really document those very well in the project. But if you open up my locked file, you'll definitely see the different types of lights in there. So let's just jump into 3D view here. And I placed 2 spotlights, one on this side of the building and one on this side, one on each corner. And they're kind of rotated to just in the floor plan. What's going on here? That was weird. Z enters, zooms in on everything that you've drawn. So these are spotlights. They're just rotated a little bit to point at these walls. And I made some changes to them. I obviously changed the color to daylight. Fluorescent daylight, and then I put a color filter on them so that when we render that light will be a different color on the building. So you can play around with that. So I placed one there and I placed one here. I also put in some furniture and applied materials to them.
Are those just like stock ones, or did you custom do those?
These are not. These are actually downloaded from. I don't know exactly who, Herman Miller collection. You know, so you can jump online, go to their website. But these pieces of furnitures, are in that in-class assignment 5 folder, so you don't have to do the legwork. But yeah, so a lot of companies have BIM models of their furniture or anything that they have, pretty much. Great resources. RevitCity.com is a great resource. You have to create a username and password, but once you do, it's like a forum kind of that people upload and download BIM models. So if you're looking for a particular object, like this for the final, you can definitely find that there, or the projector, or some of these strip lights, or even the whiteboards. So you don't have to model them. You can find those online. Herman Miller is a pretty good resource. What's the other one that I found in the past? Autodesk Seek is good. They've got a lot of lights. But I find that they don't have, that's all they have is lights, more or less.
They haven't updated it in years.
It's better than it's been in the past.
Oh,
Yeah. But let's see, BIM families. Let's cancel that. So we've got Autodesk Seek, Revit City, and I found this to be pretty useful too. This rcat.com. If you go to BIM libraries, and then basically through the CS, was it CSI is what it's called? The CSI divisions. So it's broken up into you know, the CSI divisions for architecture and interior design of how to categorize different different elements. But this thing has a lot of BIM models that are pretty cool. So at any rate, those are kind of the three that I use the most. Autodesk Seek, Revit City, and Free BIM through this rcat.com. And then of course, if you go to a specific manufacturer, you're looking for a specific type of table or whatever, chances are they have BIM models that you can download for free. You might have to open up, like you can't just download them and expect materials to be applied and things like that, so you'll have to kind of open up the family, maybe create a parameter so that you can change the materials and stuff. So it's not just poof, the materials are set. They're typically, if they have materials on them, they're not very good materials for rendering, so be careful of that. But yeah, so these lights are just scone lights. They're set at the standard height. I just placed an array of them. Same with these lights here. They're a different type of scone light. They're a sphere. Sometimes, I don't know, I had trouble placing like this type of light on the exterior walls, so I had to change up the light. Sometimes you'll run into conflicts in that way, in that regard. But I just basically applied the materials to the furniture that I gave you in the in-class assignment 5. This was something that I built for one of my other courses last semester, and it's just kind of like a signboard. It's a little parametric, but not much. It can change height basically, but you also have that to place in your file. If you ever see communities that have like signboards all around with, like, you know, descriptions and stuff, it's kind of one of those things. This piece is, I don't think it's a standard stock in Revit. I think it was one that I found on Revit City. But again, you just have to apply your materials to them. This light is stock in Revit, so when you go to open up lighting families, those are in there. I can't remember if I changed the light quality of this yet. No, they're still yellow. Change those to daylight as well. Well, I guess the last thing I wanted to do was, before we do any rendering, is you know, we're in our industry or our area, wood is kind of the dominant building material. So I just wanted to show you guys that we can change, you know, the color and material of our mullions. I'm not going to duplicate and rename this particular mullion in the future. Before you place them, you probably would, because if I do, then it's only going to change this one, and I'd like to just change them all at once. So I'm going to change the material to being our glue laminated material that we created. have a lot of them in here.
Yeah, they're all spelled.
Well, yeah.
One, right?
Oh, cool. This is the one that okay, we don't want to pick that one, but you could make a custom pattern for your, glue laminated materials too. Just like we made our custom pattern at one time. At one time. I'm going to refrain from saying that, actually. Ew, I don't like how that looks. Let's try the other one. So this is where you might want to rotate. I think this one's rotated 90 degrees. Yeah, okay. So this is yeah, that looks a little better. Yeah, cool. And maybe change this guy to one of these, and they'll all change. Whoops. Alright, so to place a camera view, we want to go to whatever level we want to be referenced at. And there's two ways to place a camera. In our view ribbon, I don't typically do it from this way. You can hit the down arrow and select camera. You can also, in your quick access toolbar up here, you have your options as well, the same options, walk through, camera, and 3D view. So basically, I don't know where we want to view from, maybe just underneath the steps for now. And we click once and we hold it and drag. And when we click twice, and it creates your camera view. Go back to our level 1. This guy kind of looks at your focal depth, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And then this is your field of vision. So if I stopped this here, and let's go back to that camera view, which is 3D view 1, you'll see that it's cut off and you can't see that wall back there anymore. So you want to be careful about that. And the reason why it's showing up in my floor plan is because I have this box selected at the moment. So if I unclick that and then the camera's not there, but if you right click on the camera view and say show camera, it'll come back. Okay? So that's pretty key. What's that?
Go to your camera view and click on your viewport and show them how to increase the size for renders so they don't end up.
I'm getting to that.
Well, I didn't
You
say
ate too
anything.
much coffee this morning. Just slow down. Slow down. Just slow down.
Came in at 9:30.
It's 8:30. Okay, so we have a camera view. We're looking at our building, and our eye elevation in our properties is at 5 feet 6 inches. Our target elevation is 5 feet 6 inches. So we're just looking like straight ahead, basically, right? So if we start to change these numbers here, our camera will start to pivot and look around. I wouldn't recommend messing with these because there's an easier tool to mess with that. And we'll get to that in a second, because I'm going to show you how to increase the size. In order to increase the size of this, you can start to pull on these tabs, right? And it makes it bigger. But it also starts to distort the image. And so if we have our render settings up here, you can click on printer and it starts to show you the width and height of the image. And so as I change this, right, so does my height here and my width. Right, so we can set our image to be a specific dimension that we want. And I don't know, maybe a 10 by 10 or something like that.
How did you get to that little box?
So there's two ways we can get to that. We can go to our View tab and hit Render, which brings up the dialog box. There's also a little tool down here at the bottom, right here. Where is it? This little Show Render dialog. Yeah. And I'm going to guess that, yeah, I wouldn't even mess with that. It does similar settings. So this is where you basically can change your DPI of your image. So typically 300 DPI is pretty good. And so we have the size of our image that we want. You know, maybe it needs to be bigger. Maybe it needs to be something super wide. Not really sure. But this little steering wheel here allows me to do a lot of things with this camera viewport. The up-down allows me to change the height. So if I want to start looking from standing on the steps, right, I can do that. I can use the look tool to look around. You can use the pan tool to pan. It's not as easy to use, but you can see these numbers start to change, right? My eye elevation, my target elevation, those all start to change based off of what I do. And if you don't like where you're sitting, you can click the rewind, right, and now go back to maybe the beginning. I'm kind of was liking somewhere in here. And we can also walk. So you know, if you wanted to walk this image a little forward, a little backwards, you know, to get the position exactly where you want to be, you can change where your camera sits in space as well. I don't really use the zoom and orbit much, but you know, orbit starts to allow you to rotate, but it's not as fixed as the look, you know, so you're fixed in one spot and you're looking around, whereas the orbit, you're kind of like orbiting the whole project, and you can get pretty wonky.
Orbiting based on your focal point versus your camera point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that one last year.
Yeah. In the advanced class. Yeah. This is not supposed to be an advanced class.
There's a difference. There's a difference.
So typically when you want to set up a render, you know, all your vertical lines should be relatively straight. If you start to use the look tool to look around, you can see how it distorts kind of some stuff. The other kind of interesting, so you kind of want to get that where all your vertical lines feel pretty straight. And the other thing is this little arrow right here. If you click on it, it brings up a sub menu that allows you to change the size of your of this wheel. I like the full navigation wheel because it allows you to do a lot of things with it. But if you start to get your image and it's starting to look like fish-eyed or just really distorted, you can increase and decrease the focal length. So if you click this, it gives you a little zoom button, and that allows you to, if I click and hold and move the mouse forward, it zooms in or zooms out. And you can see how it changes the perception of the image, right? So you kind of want to find that sweet spot where it looks pretty darn good. And it's really up to you of whether you know, or if you want a fisheye look and see a lot of things, maybe you have a, and to get out of that, you press escape. And you're back to your steering wheel. You can press escape again to get out of your steering wheel. And you can also hit Shift W to get it back. Shift W to turn it off and on. So if you wanted a, kind of a blown out view where it's, more like a panorama shot a little bit, you can start to increase the size of this camera, and achieve that if that's what you're going for. But you don't have to. I don't know what the heck that is. It's a column. I don't know why I have a column there. Go ahead and delete that. So the next kind of step is to set up your lighting situation. So this is where you choose kind of if you want exterior sunlight only coming through the building, exterior sun and artificial light, which is the lights that you placed in the building, and exterior artificial light only is only your lights. And then they have a choice of interior sun only, interior sun and artificial lights, interior artificial lights only. I have yet to really notice a difference between interior and exterior, whether which one you use. I don't know, do you have some insight on that, Ryan?
Basically, you put some filters, certain ones on and off.
Yeah, I find that it doesn't matter.
No, because you go under the lights and you actually tell which ones you want to use.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah. No, it's a quick tool if you want to.
Yeah, no, I just thought maybe, because I've never noticed a difference between the two. But if you want to render a daytime scenario and you don't want your lights, right, that you placed in there to light up for daytime, you do exterior sun only or interior sun only. So we're going to do a daytime render, right, to start out. And we can set our sun settings up by clicking this little button. And the default light setting is kind of like this 135-degree angle, it's like, or a 35-degree angle, and it's coming from the left or the right, depending on what you select. What we can do is set up a still image, which allows us to look at the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the spring equinox, the fall equinox. Those are all kind of presets, and that changes the time, the day, right? So you can select whatever day you want. You can move forward to the present, like today, or even 3 weeks from now, right? You can set up whatever day you want, and the time of the day. And so depending on the month, right, the sun angles are different, right? So you can start to figure out, well, maybe I want to show this, you know, in March on, you know, the 20th day of March at noon, the sun's going to probably be at what, like 20 degrees or something like that, and you'll get a different cast shadow versus setting it at June at noon when the sun's at like a 60-degree angle, and you're going to see basically mostly shade in your building, hopefully. Right? That's the goal anyways, right?
Oh, you gotta have light.
You gotta have light. The other cool thing is in here you can also set up your location. So for instance, stops thinking. This is based off of Google, basically. We can type in Moscow, Idaho. And click OK. Yeah, that's fine. So now we have the region that we're actually in, right? And it's sun setting. So we're, you know, as you move from place to place, the sun angle is slightly different because the Earth is round, right? No, the Earth is flat. Okay, that's going to sound really bad in the video. No context. You're just going to hear me start screaming and banging on the desk. But again, so we're in Moscow, Idaho, and we can go to our summer solstice, winter solstice, spring solstice, and it changes the angle of the sun and where it's looking from. You can also set up single day renders and multi-day renders. I would stick with the still days, but this is where you can start to do sun studies and looking at how the sun or your building reacts with the sun, things like that. But we're going to stick with the still, and we're just going to I don't know, we're going to try to get some cool angles in here. So let's go to winter solstice. Yeah, let's see what happens. And the other thing is down here in your graphics display options. If you notice, if we hit lighting, it's that same settings, right? So those settings translate to the rendering settings and the graphic display settings. So you can set them up in your graphic display options before going to rendering as well. And your graphic display options give you a little bit more capabilities of different types of ways you want to render. And so, or not ways you want to render. Well, so this is different than this, right? It just carries over the same sun settings back and forth between the two. But this graphic display option allows you to change, you know, whether you want hidden line, shaded, consistent colors, or realistic, right? So if we click on realistic and hit apply, it'll start showing our materials, right? And we could also put cast shadows and ambient shadows on and hit apply. And so that starts to show these sun settings and what it's going to look like when you click the render button, right? And so you can also adjust the shadows here. So maybe they're a little bit too dark, you want some more ambient light in it. You can hit apply and you'll see that starting to change. Maybe that's a little too much ambient light. So you don't necessarily have to render out an image to get your design ideas across. So if you're just in like schematic or you know, your first iteration showing your project, you don't necessarily have to render. You can kind of do these cool set up these graphic display options and then save these images off so you don't have to render all the time. But you can also now in 2015 put sketch lines on things, which I think is pretty cool. So this adjusts how jittery the sketch lines are, and this adjusts the extension beyond something. If I hit apply, it'll start to make the drawing look a little more sketchy. You know, it's not so computer generated. And it probably looks a little better like in hidden line, so that you're only seeing the sketch lines versus all the materials. So that's a pretty cool function. It's just new for 2015. Photo exposure, never had a need to mess with that. You could also set a background image if you wanted to, but it's just as easy after you render to drop a background image into Photoshop. Could also save the view as a view template. So we haven't really talked about view templates, but just showing that that's there. The other thing is this transparency. If you start to bump the transparency, it starts to make your walls transparent and your objects transparent, so you can see through them. This graphic display option works in your 3D view. I don't know if it works on the sections or not. It'd be really cool if it did. You can check that out later. And you can also set up the shadows and stuff on your floor plans. So, you know, if you want to show, so let's just click OK. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to show you some other stuff about this graphic display options here. So we can turn on the stuff in here, and so you can start to get, you know, a shadow line for your walls where so you're cutting this thing at 4 feet, and so then the sun hits it and it creates those shadow lines. Definitely learned about that in 154, about how Matt likes those shadow lines. Makes it look real cool. I personally think it muddies the drawings. You can't tell what's going on, but it's a cool effect. You can also reduce the shadow, right? Just similar to what we were doing. So it's very light. You know, it's just kind of a little touch. Haven't really played with this much in floor plan view, but you can certainly manipulate, you know, your floor plan drawings. It not only applies to 3D prints, you know, 3D camera views. It applies to pretty much all views. You can also do it in sections. I know you can. And in elevations as well. Now that I'm thinking about it in my head, like I've done that. You can also adjust your line weights a bit. Doesn't really do much in the plan view, but in a 3D view it kind of makes things a little bit heavier. You can also still do the transparency, I think, here. Yeah, doesn't really work as well. And I'm going to guess you can do sketch lines here as well, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So you can have you know, all sorts of different looks, basically. So I don't know, I think that sketch tool is really cool. At any rate, let's get back to our 3D view, because we were working on that. And graphic display options. So typically I like to set up my graphic display options first before I go to my render view, just so I have some of that stuff set up already. And if I want to be able to print this off for a discussion, you know, a pin-up one day, you know, you can do that without having this like really detailed rendered out thing, and then people look at you like, this is just supposed to be a schematic thing. Why are you like rendering it out? And teachers get focused on the wrong things sometimes in critiques when you have too much information to show. They're like, I don't know if that material looks good. And it's like, tell me if, like, you know, about the design. Forget about the materials, right? At any rate. Off on some weird tangent.
How do you make it transparent?
So in the graphic display options, there's a transparency option here. And it is grayed out in wireframe, but hidden line, shaded, consistent color, and realistic allows you to mess with that. And then silhouettes is, let's see if we can, well, that's fun. I changed it to shaded. So you can see how quickly you can start to really change what it looks like. I guess I didn't have sketch lines on either, but you can see the difference between wide lines and no lines, and hit apply. Not much of a difference, is there? I don't know, it's hard to tell, but it does change your line type of your elements. Sometimes it applies a thicker line in particular areas. And again, that one line type that I created, going back into our manage tab and creating a new line type shows up in there, right? So hopefully you remember how to do that as well. I'm not going to get into that again today. Oh, dun dun dun. Okay, so that kind of explains a bit about graphic display options for your viewports. Just going to change this back to realistic. And maybe take the transparency off and put shadows back in. Maybe make those shadow lines a little bit darker just so we know that what the shadows are going to do before we render it. It's nice to know, because shadows are kind of cool in a render. They really start to express the structure, you know, on walls. And talk about, you know, changing, what is that in architecture history, when we talk about, you know, a white wall with a shadow cast on it changes the perspective of blah, blah, blah. You missed Phil's wonderful
Don't
explanation.
use that quote, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, don't put that in a paper. But there, you know, it's like an expression of something that, like an organic thing, right? Like a tree casting a shadow on like a. It's really out there. Right?
Sounds civil.
But anyways, you're expressing. You know, it's kind of cool to see these details and the shadows cast and whatever. So, rendering. This is where you can set up the settings of how much detail you're going to render out. If you were not rendering in the cloud, you would probably want to start to manually change some of this stuff. And so, if we click on draft and like click render, for example, hopefully it won't take a ton of time. Hopefully. I am at 300 DPI, which is probably going to take a lot of time. So I'm going to cancel this. Yeah, I'm going to cancel this. Change it back to a screen and click render and see if that happens any faster. But basically, you know, as you increase these settings, the longer the render takes on your computer and the more crisper it gets. So if you're looking at
If you want ours, can you render the 300 DPI? Like when we turn
oh yeah,
on? Okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm just showing you, trying to show you the difference between some of these. I'm gonna have you send stuff to the cloud, so it's gonna render in like 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
It'll be super fast, which is what. So you can see like draft, pretty crappy render, right? It's pretty crappy. And you can start bumping this up, but when you click on like best, it's basically changing these settings. So I went to edit instead of best, but it's bumping all these different settings. And I'm not gonna sit here because I honestly don't know much about these settings, to be honest. When we didn't have the cloud to render, I would copy custom to my clipboard, or to this, right? To my custom, I would copy the medium and hit copy, and then like, I don't know, bump a couple reflections. You know, as you start to bump these things, the render takes longer and longer to do, and it really bogs down your system. You can't do anything else on your computer, which really sucks. So you can't continue to work on your project or work on something else, maybe in Photoshop. You just can't do it because it's taking up all your CPU and all your graphics card, and so it ties your computer up. And so now that the cloud has come out,
Does the cloud render in best?
it renders in whatever settings you set up here. So typically I'll click on best, and then I will click this. So I've got my sun settings set up. You know, if we had our lights turned on, which we don't in this option, I would get my printer 300 DPI, whatever, you know, all these settings kind of set up. I wouldn't mess with the exposure at this point. So if you're signed in here under your Autodesk Education license, so it'd be your username and your password, you can click Render in Cloud. And so you have to have these settings set right, first of all, or you won't get your stuff, it won't work. And you can click Don't Show Me This Message Again, but I like to see it. Right, continue. And it opens up a Render in Cloud dialog box. Excuse me. And you can change your view. I would recommend doing the one that you're in, right? And you set up your renders in. The output type, I typically do still image. These two I haven't played around with much, the interactive panorama and the illuminance, mainly because I haven't had the need to. So the output type is still image. Your render quality, I like to click Final. And your image size, I always like to do the maximum 16 megapixels. And then the exposure is where, is basically, there's two different types of exposure. There's the advanced exposure, which is settings in Autodesk 360, which you have to go into Autodesk 360 and kind of manipulate, which I don't really know how to do. Yeah, Ryan's never found it, and he's a guy that'll search to death for it. So the advanced, so if you click advanced and render it out, interior shots it works okay for. Exterior shots it doesn't work very well, and for night renders it really doesn't work well. So the native exposure is basically the generic native exposure here, which again, you can start to mess with after you've rendered it out and kind of adjust your exposure, but I would leave it kind of the standard exposure settings. And then the file format, you can choose between a TIFF, JPEG, or PNG. I like to use PNGs because the background will drop out of the image, and so you'll have a transparent background, so you just have the building or whatever you have. So like if you have views like this stuff back here, this gray area back here will drop out if you use a PNG and click alpha transparency background. If you don't click those, that background will appear in your render, and then you'll have to manually cut it out in order to put another background image in. So, and then we can click, so this is telling me that it takes 16 credits to do, but because we have education licenses, it's free for us to render in the cloud. So if you're in a firm, this render would cost them 16 credits, which would be, they get so many per year based upon what license they purchase. So be careful with that when you're working in a firm. They might be like, what are you doing? That's like a $300 image. But you're like, but it looks so good, and you can charge $500 or $1,000 for it, which they do. And you can also click email me when complete. So you can click start render, and this will basically gather the screen data, and at some point it'll allow me to continue this in the background.
So, while that's going, if you know you want this image on a full-size board, 3x3, 3x6, or whatever, so you want it bigger than 10 by 10, you don't want to blow it up 3 times because you go down to 100 dpi per inch. How do you make it bigger? Say I want to render it out at 20 inches by 20 inches. That exact viewport.
That exact viewport, I would increase the size of it and change my depth perspective. Huh?
Go click on it. Click on the viewport.
Killing me. You got some secret here.
Yeah, click on the viewport. Go up there to the top right. This is size drop. On your manage.
Size crop?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That's what I wanted you to do first. That's why I was shaking my head no.
Okay.
It distorts, it'll distort, but if you do that first, you start with all the settings at whatever size you want.
I'm learning something new because I don't ever use this. I like to manually set my stuff up to the exact size that I want and change my focal depth.
And then you can do all that without the risk of distorting or fisheyeing.
But this just changes the size, right? So it just increases the image.
The Windows image. So where you were like, oh, I want it 10 inches because maybe it comes in at 6 inches, but you're going to want it this big.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can start there and then change all of your view settings and use your wheel
So if I change this to 30
by 30.
by 30,
Yeah. If you zoom out, you still have the same viewport, but the image size is 30 by 30.
so it's the exact same thing as selecting this and moving it.
No, because if you move it,
That's distorted from what it was.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Shouldn't be,
Very
right?
distorted.
It's way distorted,
No, shouldn't have been.
Stretched.
but it is.
Oh, that's because we did all the settings first and all. If you do that first, it won't distort. It'll simply make the viewport bigger, and then you do all your settings.
Okay, let's check it out. We've got some time.
Is there any way you could go over exploded axonometric?
Yeah, that's our.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
It used to take it like forever.
Yeah, it's really not. Okay, so I'm in this image, right? And I can click here, and I want this to be 30 inches by 30 inches. Huh?
If I'm wrong, I'm gonna look really bad. No,
Wow, that's
that's horrible. I don't know.
yeah. So there's multiple ways of doing the same thing, right? You can do it manually and get, or you can do it this way. This actually is quicker, so it's a cool function. But again, you'd still want to go in here and change your focal depth, right? And zoom that thing back up.
Just how I did
Yeah. So, multiple ways to do things in Revit. They're all correct.
Like design.
No, they're not. Okay, so let's quickly set up a night render too. So I'm going to create a new camera outside, and I'm just going to sit it somewhere out here and do that. And I'm going to quickly change this size to width, let's say 30 inches, and our height to be I don't know, 15. And let's go in and do our focal, increase focal. Escape, and maybe we want to just be a little bit taller. So, yeah, we're hovering in space, We're on a ladder. You think those like really great shots are done standing on the ground? They set up all sorts of crazy stuff to get those cool architectural shots of stuff, right? They stand on ladders, they go underwater, and do everything. So, in order to get a night render set up, first we have to turn on our light. So in visibility graphics, under lighting fixtures, we have to turn on the light source in the camera view in order for the lights to render out. And click OK. And you notice you now see yellow hues kind of around all your camera views. And we can go back into our render settings and change this to exterior sun and artificial is nice. And now you have these artificial light option here, which basically is every single light that's in here is here and it's checked. So if there were some lights that you didn't want to render out, you could uncheck them here and they wouldn't render. But we want to render all the lights. And we can set up a still image, and basically you change your time to being like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, so you get a little hue of the light but not much. And click OK. And I guess the other thing, we can go to best, printer, and let's just go ahead and send that to the cloud. And again, we're going to want to set up final render, maximum, native exposure, PNG with an alpha transparency.
Are you happy with 150 DPI?
No.
60.
Oh.
Yeah.
I want to get to other stuff, okay? It's telling me 5 hours. That's awesome. They're probably like working on it or something. So, okay, we've got those two renders rendering in the cloud. And one more quick thing for camera views. you can also turn on a section box in a camera view. And what that allows you to do, if you select on it and go back to your floor plan, you can start setting up section perspectives. Right? So we can look at cutting through the building and going back to our 3D view, and now we would want to change where our camera sits in space, but you can start to set up a section perspective of what's in the building, and you can render this out. So it starts to become a pretty cool tool in that respect, and you have to do some photoshopping to maybe, you know, poche all this stuff. I wonder if you can do that actually in our visibility graphics. So let's just check with walls. See what happens. Thanks. Thought I clicked walls. So it does work. I don't know if it works in rendering settings though, when you go to render it out. I actually haven't messed with that much. It's always things I haven't messed with because I haven't had the need to do it. But if you want, you know, to just do line work, you can start to poche all those, just similar to a section cut, which is pretty nice. And you can do perspectives. Okay, so Axonimetrics. Yeah, we're going to do it in a camera view. You can do it in the 3D view, or you can do it in a camera view. We're going to do one in a camera view so that we have kind of perspective, regular perspective. So I'm going to draw a camera out, and we probably want to be looking kind of down on this object a little bit, or on the building itself, and maybe expand this to 20 by 30 and increase our focal depth just a bit so that we can start to view this thing. So when you select an object, up here in views we have this displace element tool, and what that allows me to do is basically select individual objects or multiple objects and displace them. And so where this starts to kind of come into play here, we can displace our windows out a little bit, we can select our beam system, move it up a bit, so we can start to see all the different layers, right? Sometimes it's not easy to select stuff, so I don't know how many other windows I have open here, but let's also grab our 3D window and maybe change this to wire hidden line and WT tile. Yeah. And let's just hide some elements in this view that we've already displaced so that we can start to grab so I have all of those selected. I can click back into this with my middle mouse button. They're all still selected, and I can click the displace element tool and start to raise those up. I don't know, the camera view probably needs to be more like this so we can start to see those different elements a little better. But then what's nice is they're all one unit and we can move them around, you know, and place them where we need to place them. We can select all of our columns. You know, move them out a bit. You know, so you can start to displace everything basically. I think I'm selecting, maybe not. I don't know what I'm selecting there. We'll find out. Not selecting anything there. Select our column caps. What the frick? Why isn't it working? It's always something doesn't work right. At any rate, you can do it with walls. Right, start pulling these wall elements out. We don't have a ton of time left, so the other thing is that you can reset, put it back where it was, and you can also use these dashed lines to show where the object actually sits in real space. So can start to create an axonometric, basically, of these exploded elements. You could just as very well easily do it in just a regular 3D view. I would recommend duplicating your 3D view before you do it. So if you right-click any view, you can duplicate it. You can duplicate it with detailing, which means anything you've done to that viewport and the setups that you've created will duplicate to the new viewport. If you just click duplicate, it'll create a copy of it, and it doesn't necessarily carry over all the settings that you have for your other viewport. And what that allows you to do is to create this exact same viewport, and now you have a copy of it. You can rename it something else. So you could do exploded axon, and you could start to do that here if you wanted to. Right? It's this tool that allows you to start to move these elements, and so you don't necessarily have to be in a camera view. This gives you a little more free range on how stuff gets displaced. I think you can spin around the model a little bit better, right? They were grouped. That's why I couldn't do it. I hate groups. And it only did it to the one? You edit the group, it should change it to all of them. Explode all your groups. I hate groups.
Not a array.
Array.
No, it is an array. I arrayed them. Array sets it into a group.
Did you make it a group first? And
No.
array it? Oh.
No.
I don't know.
Yeah, so at any rate, be careful about when you array something and you're trying to do this exploded stuff, just ungroup them all and then select all of them.
Did your first render finish?
let's check it out. So let's go. We don't have any time, but we're gonna go there anyways. Oh yeah, you can. So let's finish this. No. Yeah. I want to finish that. So under our view tab, we should be able to go hit render gallery, and that should open up our Autodesk 360 rendering. And it doesn't look like this is done yet, but you can see how it's starting to look. Pretty good. Way better than that draft that we rendered out. It's only at 50%. So once you have the image, you can click this guy, and you should be able to save it as a JPEG here under this little tab. Should be able to save it as a JPEG. And then I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Photoshop, but you may want to just do some light photoshopping, drop in a background. This is really dark, right? Because it was a nighttime shot. So when it's finished, I do recommend jumping into Photoshop. I can put a little tutorial online about how to just change the contrast of the image so that it starts to read a little better, and drop in a background image. I can do that today and get that done. And then one more thing. So you can now then, once you have your image done and it's a JPEG, right, you can insert it back into your sheet set by inserting an image. And you can go to wherever you save that image, and you can insert it back into your project after you've touched it up in Photoshop and got the render from the cloud. Does that make some sense? So you can drop it back on a sheet. And since I don't have an image to drop on the sheet, I won't do it, but that's how you do all that stuff.